Hey everybody, welcome to the class page, hst324.alexgalarza.com. Make sure that you bookmark that page, keep it handy, because everything that we're going to be doing in the class will run through it. We are going to be using Desire to Learn, so you can see the link here to the course page on the right-hand side. But really, this page is the one-stop shop for our summer semester together. So I'd like to take a minute to just run you through the different sections of the course page and to explain how the class is actually going to work. Let's start at the landing page, which is going to have the top level information you'd usually see on a syllabus, so course policies and assignment breakdowns. But let's pause for a moment at the class goals. Now, David Bailey, who I'd mentioned taught this class before me, titled it The History of Sports in America. And I've changed the title, one, to reflect the fact that I'm a Latin Americanist and I'm going to teach you kind of from my perspective, but also to make an argument about understanding modern sports as being, even if it's about the United States, in this class, we have to put it in a conversation with an international perspective. Too many of the games that we're going to be talking about in this class, really their stories are about placing the United States into conversation with somewhere else. So that's why it's sports and the United States. And the other reason for changing the title is to signal that not everyone thinks about the United States as America, especially Latin Americans. The class goals then are, first and foremost, yes, to understand the history of modern sports in the United States. Where did baseball start? How did college football become popular? Where was basketball invented, and how did it make its way into the United States? But it's to take a look at those histories with some specific questions in mind. And that's where the four key concepts, space, race, gender, and money, come into play. Did cities matter? What kinds of racial dynamics affected the developments of these sports? Were women being included? Were norms around femininity, around the proper role of women, being challenged or reinforced? What kinds of forms of masculinity came out of a game like baseball versus a game like college football? And money. Money, the great tension that animates a lot of debates today around what its proper role is in sports. We're going to keep running into that tension about what sports are really about, profit, play, these kinds of issues. The goal then by the end of the class is for you to be able to showcase historical thinking on the issues that we're going to bring up in contemporary sports. So it's about tying the past to the present, because many of you are taking this class because you're interested in sports. You may be fans, athletes. You may even have a particular kind of interest in an issue like the amateur status of NCAA athletes. And so it's about taking a contemporary question and tying it to historical issues to show that there's continuities, but there's also differences, and that you've done some deep thinking on how these things come together. The rest of the page, read through closely, so you can pause the video right now and give it a read through in detail. I will say that 15% of your grade is your quizzes, and these are weekly, but they're reading comprehension. So if you're doing a good job on the readings, keeping up with the content, taking good notes, you should do well on them. You'll get more details on the film review and final project later, but also pay attention to the fact that half your grade comes from the weekly writing prompts. So that's because that's where you get to show me your thinking. This is where you get to make arguments and show me that you're doing good thinking on the readings and on the prompt. Don't plagiarize, you'll fail the class. If you're a student with a disability, be in touch and we can talk about accommodations. Don't worry about buying any textbooks because we don't have any assigned textbooks for the class. And finally, read this section on due dates carefully because I don't accept late work. So if you know you're going to miss something ahead of time, get it in early. If you have a documented excuse, of course, we can work around that. But just pay attention to the due dates and know that the late stuff won't be accepted. So this is the most important page in our class. It's really your one-stop shop to understanding what it is we're doing on a week-to-week basis, getting to the readings, and making sure you're following the assignments. Each week is always going to follow generally the same format. Except for week one, we have some extra video here is because I'm kind of orienting you to the class page. But taking week two of baseball, for example, you'll always have two videos here. One will be reading guidance that I've pre-recorded pointing out what it is that I want you to be paying attention to as you move through the content. And then the other video will be more of an on-demand, week-by-week update from me talking about what it is that I've noticed you picking up on in the readings, maybe some questions that have come up, talking about the quizzes, etc. Those will be timely and again recorded on a week-to-week basis. So always we'll start with videos, and then each week has a reading list. So everything that is content for that week will be linked either in PDF, or you'll have a link to another web page. It might be a podcast, it might be a news article or magazine article that's online, but that will always be linked from the list of the content for that week. So it's readings, but it also might be other things. The next kind of subset here is instructions on the quiz and the weekly writing prompts. Every week you're going to have quizzes and writing prompts. You'll have the information towards the bottom of each week. The D2L quizzes will always be due on Thursdays, so that gives you, by midnight on Thursdays, so that gives you basically from Monday until late Thursday evening to be moving through the content, but also making sure that you are paying attention to the prompt itself as you move through the content. So the quiz are kind of check-ins for how to best address the question that I'm asking each week. Make sure you're picking up on the important information, the kind of major lessons out of each content, but also putting it into dialogue with the question that I'm asking. And finally, each week has a film, and I'll explain more about the film assignment in a second here, but you get a choice basically to pick throughout the semester, and each week has a suggested film. So you'll get to pick out of those films, but each one has their own options, except for week one where we don't have a film as an option because you'll be indicating your choices. Next, we have the assignments page. So I've already mentioned that you'll be taking quizzes every week. These are about reading comprehension, and I'm going to tip you off in very obvious ways most of the time in my reading guidance videos as to what's going to be on the quiz, but they're also going to be the most important parts of the reading. So these are not gotcha questions. These are about your reading comprehension, and they're really a tool for you to have a set of bullet points and a bit of an outline to make sure that you touch on in your writing prompts. So think of the quizzes as something that, as long as you're paying attention to the reading fairly closely, and you're taking good notes, and you're looking for the most important points on them, you should do well in the quizzes. And as a bonus, you'll already have a solid set of ideas with which to tackle the writing prompts. So there'll always be a relationship between the kinds of things that I asked you on the quiz and the kinds of things that you'll be writing about in the writing prompts. So all of those quizzes will be on D2L. As I explained on the schedule page, you'll have usually most of the week to prepare for the quiz, and then the quiz should launch you into the writing prompt. The writing prompts are really the main opportunity we have in this class to communicate with each other. So I want you to note that, first of all, it's a big part of your grade. It's one of the only opportunities that we get to directly exchange ideas. But also, while it's a little high stakes, they're only going to be between 400 and 500 words. So it's not a ton of writing. And I'm really focused on ideas in these writing prompts. You should observe proper grammar. There should be a structure to your response, and you should endeavor to give us good writing. But you really want to make sure that you're answering the prompt fully with details. So I always suggest students start with an outline, start with a solid sense of what it is you're going to write about, rather than kind of letting it hit you as you write. Come up with a plan and then write accordingly, because as much as 400 and 500 words, between 400 and 500 words is not a ton of writing, it's often more difficult to write less, because you really have to make sure that you're actually saying something rather than kind of filling a word requirement. So the criteria here that you should be paying attention to, and I'll refer to them as in my update videos as well and see how you're doing on them, is do you demonstrate an understanding of all the material that we covered. So oftentimes the writing prompts will be on something specific, but there will be a way that you can use that writing prompt to touch on the other readings that's not directly or maybe obviously being targeted by the prompt itself. Then, did you answer the prompt? So make sure as you're writing, whether you copy and paste the prompt or whether you have it on another screen in front of you, make sure that you provide a clear and persuasive analysis of what we've covered, but that it is actually directly answering the prompt. Ask the question to yourself and see if you can, speaking to yourself, just directly answer the question as best you can. Then add water from there. Do you communicate in clear prose? Is it easy to understand? Is it clearly organized? And do you meet the word count limit and length? The 400, 500 word limit is strictly observed. So be somewhere between those counts, and this should be something that you have multiple versions of. So it's probably most helpful if you write it throughout the week as you are completing the readings, and definitely by the time that you complete the quiz. Because if you have an outline already of the prompt and you don't kind of shelve that until later, then the quiz is actually going to be a helpful exercise for you to produce a good answer to the writing prompt itself. The other kind of assignment that we have is going to be the film review. So these film reviews are a little bit longer. They're between 700 and 800 words. And these are designed not so much to, review the film in a film critic review sense, but to look at the kind of story it's telling and think about what that story has to do with the history that we're learning. So, in other words, as I say, don't tell us whether you liked it. Instead, analyze it as a sort of argument that you can contextualize based on what we've learned. So, I hear in the instructions to the film review talk about the 30 for 30 film Bad Boys, about the Detroit Pistons as an example. And this film it's a great film, first of all, but it's a way to talk about the city of Detroit and race in Detroit. So an essay might focus on where race and Detroit come out in the story of the Bad Boys. The role of a new stadium in the Palace of Auburn Hills, which will now be moving downtown, and what kinds of relationships that develop between players and coaches that the film outlines tell us about masculinity. So those are all themes that you'll learn about in class, and as you see those themes come up in a particular film, make notes as you watch it and say, like, oh, this has something to do with the history of race in basketball, which is something we've learned about in class. So maybe I can talk about that in the film. And the essays, and again, we'll have more details as we get closer to this, but did you provide a short summary? Do you focus on a specific theme or issue and contextualize it with the reading? Is your writing clear? So the writing prompts will be good practice for this, but it's a different kind of an assignment. And you'll be able to find all the films on your own. They're all available for purchase or streaming services that you might subscribe to, and quick Google search can often turn up other ways to watch the film. Then finally, we have our final project. So this is a really fun assignment. We are going to have you conduct an oral history, and these oral histories, they should be with somebody who's at least 50 or older, and it can be somebody like a current or former player, a coach, journalists, fans. The criteria is pretty loose on who this person has to be. That person has to sign a consent form, and you are going to be turning in the recording by uploading the video or audio to YouTube. But the other part of the assignment is going to be writing a 500-word commentary on how the interview drew on the things that we learned about in class, or is related to the things that we learned about in class. And you get access to this kind of question bank here to start to shape your interview. So we'll have around June a check-in point for this assignment before it gets too close to the end date, and you'll also have additional guidance as we move forward. And finally, you have the instructors page, and this is really just a page for you to learn a little bit more about the three of us who are teaching this class together, and to follow some links about what it is we do outside of the class. I want to circle back to the schedule page to kind of just walk you through all the cool stuff we're going to be covering in the class. Week 1, I'll talk about in detail in a separate guidance video, but it's the origin story. We're going to be looking at what modern sports are, where they come from, and how they spread in the United States. We'll start laying out those 4 key concepts to trace them out in the rest of the class. And week 2, we have baseball. This really is a week on baseball. The film that week that you can write a review about is A League of Their Own, starring Tom Hanks, Rosie O'Donnell, Madonna, kind of a real 90s movie in a lot of senses. Then week 3 is college football. And this is the first of the weeks that has a sport at its head, but isn't really just about that sport. This could also be titled College Athletics and Issues in College Athletics, but we will look at football explicitly because it kind of plays a special role in the spread and popularity of intercollegiate competitions. So we have some readings on understanding where college sports come from, but then we get into issues that are real contemporary, issues around Title IX, the NCAA's amateur status for student athletes, and people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar having an axe to grind with what that means and what should be done about it. And then also issues that affect you, who pays for student athletics, what are the economics of college football and basketball programs in particular. And then this issue of money is really what's focused in on in that film for the week, which is Pony Excess. It's a 30 for 30 film on Southern Methodist University's football program, which was essentially buying athletes and the fallout that resulted from it. After that, we're going to be looking at basketball. We have some great readings this week, especially on the women's game. And then the film Hoop Dreams is one of my favorites. It's about 2 young African-American boys trying to make it in the NBA in Chicago and what their lives look like, what they go through in trying to do that. Then week 5 again is one of these funny weeks where hockey is kind of the title of that week, but it's really the Olympics and hockey. And we have some readings and a great podcast about international competition in the United States and the role of hockey in the Olympic Games, what the Olympic Games are all about. And then one of my favorite documentaries of all time, Werner Herzog, Red Army. It follows basically the story of Slava Fetisov, his career for the Russian national team and his arrival in the United States as a Detroit Red Wing. Then week 6 is boxing and track, and these readings and the content for this week, including the film, it's really about the civil rights movement, and it's about Muhammad Ali, Tommy Smith, and John Carlos. These are readings that are gonna help us understand the significant role that Black athletes played in a wider civil rights era, and these are really great readings and a phenomenal film about Muhammad Ali's fight against George Foreman in Zaire. And then the final week is on soccer. So we have one reading that fits it into the culture wars, and then another historical reading that shows just how long soccer's been around in this country, and then 2 great movies, one about the NASL, in which in the 1970s and 80s world greats like Pelé, Beckenbauer, George Best all played, and then a movie about the generation that won the 1999 Women's World Cup, of which many of you probably remember names like Mia Hamm and their story.